Today we're going to talk about supplies and what I would recommend using in my videos. Before we get started, it's a new channel, so please, like, comment, and subscribe. I have two supply lists. You can screenshot them if that's easier. The first list is the minimal list. If you're a beginner and you're just getting started, it's a lower price point and helps you decide if you like the medium before you commit to buying this super long list of supplies. If you decide you are into it and you love it, then I would recommend having a look at the comprehensive list. It's stuff that's nice to have if you're painting watercolor regularly, and we'll just walk through why I suggest what I suggest in this video. Starting with the minimal list, I recommend starting with the pack because you get to experiment and play with other colors that you might not have bought otherwise. It just gives you a sense of what you use a lot versus what you don't. It's just a great starting point, and usually they're very affordable. So you can go the cheaper route and get a pack of watercolor paint with slightly larger tubes, or you can go for the Holbein brand, which is a watercolor brand that I recommend. It has 12 colors. The paint tubes are really small, but that's the main difference between low grade versus high grade paint, is that the high grade paint is very pigmented and concentrated, so you'll use such a tiny amount in comparison to the lower grade. So even though it looks like you're getting more paint with the lower grade, I think the smaller tubes will probably last you longer. You can get watercolors in dry or liquid form. If you go for the dried form, be sure to get a high quality brand. Personally, I prefer the paint in a liquid form as it's already easy to work with, but the dried form is easy to travel with, though the cons are that it can be hard to mix colors without getting the colors a little bit muddy because the paint pans are so small. So they won't have all of the exact colors that I use in my videos, but just find the color that's most similar. So for the more comprehensive palette, I would say begin with the Holbein pack, definitely, and try it out, see what you feel like you're missing, and then you could start buying paint by the tube. But I'll walk through all of the colors that I personally use and why. Yeah, so let's get started. These are both browns. Burnt umber is slightly darker and more of a cool color. Burnt sienna can be a little bit orangey, but it's a lighter brown color. I recommend having some kind of crimson. It's nice to have a crimson that's more of a wine tone. This is really helpful to blend skin tones, anything like purple to red. Ultramarine blue most likely will be in your packs. If not, use another dark blue that looks similar. Having the dark blue with the brown tones are super important with creating a gray that we will use on every painting. I'm pretty sure the Holbein one doesn't have ultramarine blue, but it has something that looks pretty similar. And I've used it before and it works fine. Compost blue or cerulean blue, basically it's a light sky blue color. You can mix ultramarine blue into a sky blue tone, but it's nice to just have it because you'll use it frequently. Meridian, it will be in your packs. It's kind of a turquoise color, so you can make it all kinds of ocean tones, teal. You can also lighten it up with yellow and make it more of like a green for trees and plants. Just a very versatile color. Yellow ochre is like this golden yellow, and it's just super handy with everything. Skin tones, trees, sunsets, everything. It blends really well with the reds, so it's just a very, it's just a staple, and that one should be in the kit as well. I like to have a bright lemon yellow. I don't use it a lot, so it's definitely not a necessary thing, but it can be really nice to, mix all of those lighter yellow tones. You can't really do that with yellow ochre because it's so dark. You can't really lighten it up in that way. But you don't only want to have the lemon yellow color because it doesn't blend as well with other colors like the yellow ochre does. It's just a little bit too intense. Vermilion, I love having a bright orange pop. It works with skin tones. It's more of a vibrant color. It's easier to make like peach and pinks and things like that. It's more on the orangey side, so if you only had the bright red, it can be hard to make purple without it just becoming like more brown. I really like Jaune Brilliant number 2. Basically, it's a peach. You can mix a peach with the colors that you have here. It's just nice to have it with sunsets mostly. I'm surprised at how much I use it. It's not an essential thing at all, but I found myself mixing peach a lot, and it's nice to have the color that I'm always mixing. And then white. We rarely use white in watercolor, but using white is how you can get some of those creamy tones if you are mixing your own paint. So for instance, the peach. You'd need a white to mix that peach color, or the sky blue as well. And there's a couple more colors I would recommend if you're buying paint by the tube. I like to have a hot pink. Again, this depends on what you end up painting a lot, which is why I recommend starting with the kit and seeing what you end up using a lot, or what colors you're kind of wishing you had. Having the hot pink color in your kit is really nice because you can't mix that like Barbie tone with these colors. I like to have that. I don't use it super often, but it's something that you can't mix otherwise. So yeah, just depends how like bright and colorful you want to paint. Another color I would recommend is phthalo blue. Normally I have it, but I forgot to order it. In unison with the ultramarine blue and the compost blue. It's hard to describe. I think it's more vibrant than ultramarine blue and maybe a little bit more teal. It's a really nice color to have if you paint a lot of ocean scenes. That would be my comprehensive list of paints that I use a lot. Again, that's why I recommend starting with the kit, and you'll see the colors that you use. And once you start buying paint by the tube, you'll see there's so many options. So these are just the colors I've tried. Feel free to explore and let me know what you think. Let me know some colors that you guys use. I'm always down to try something new, but I get a little overwhelmed when I'm looking at the very long list. So there are 3 main types of watercolor brushes. You can get synthetic brushes, synthetic animal hair brushes, and animal hair. Personally, I choose not to use animal hair brushes for ethical reasons because a lot of animals can be harmed, or wild animals are hunted in order to make those brushes. So, you know, good to do your research. And also I think technology is so advanced that you don't really need to do real animal hair because there's so many really good synthetic options. But they also are pretty expensive. But if you have other opinions, that's fine. I'll just judge you. Just kidding. My partner just informed me that there is a company that when you get your hair cut, you can send in your hair trim and make your own real hair brushes. Just FYI. So on a similar vein as the paint, I would suggest if you're a beginner buying a pack of brushes that has an assorted size for kind of the same reasons. It gives you a chance to try out different sizes, see what you like, see what you use a lot versus what you don't. And then when you choose to invest in higher quality brushes, you already know what to start with. It's helpful having a variety of size of brushes because when you're starting to paint the details, it's just really handy to have something with a tiny point. But it's better to work with a larger brush. It just gives you a lot of versatility. What you're looking for is a brush that has a good fine point and the bristles feel soft and kind of silky. So if you're a beginner, buy a pack that has a couple of options. I have 2 linked below. The first one is a set of 5 synthetic brushes. It comes with 3 round sizes and 2 flat sizes. Princeton is a really good brand. This would be an amazing set to start with. The second set is also Princeton brand. This is if you'd like a mid-range option to experiment with sable brushes, or you're investing $30 or $40 in each brush. You can also go to the art store and find student grade brushes. Anything student grade will be a little lower quality but more budget friendly. And then I have a large 2-inch brush that helps me just get the whole paper wet quickly. You can also use a sponge if you don't want to buy another brush. So yeah, that's what I would suggest for the basic list. For the comprehensive list, honestly, this is a controversial opinion, but I don't really like the expensive brushes. I think you need to buy like a good enough brush, but I prefer the synthetic brushes. I kind of like going a little on the cheaper side versus too expensive, because inevitably the point will not be as perfect, and it's nice to just get one where the point is really nice still. Whereas when they're expensive, I'll like find myself holding on and like muscling through using this brush because it's expensive, even though it's frustrating me a little bit. I would get 3 rounds and a flat. I might get a couple of sizes of a flat brush. So this one's about 1/2 inch. So I might also get an inch size. But yeah, this is kind of all I use for the most part. Another option is buying brushes individually. This is the best way to get exactly the sizes and shapes that you want, and it works out to be pretty consistent price-wise. I still do recommend the Princeton Pro series. They have a great selection of synthetic brushes, synthetic animal hair, as well as some animal hair brushes. I'm going to do a little test between a classic synthetic brush and a synthetic squirrel tail brush. This style of brush is called a mop brush because it's designed to hold a lot of paint. Personally, I don't like how much paint it holds if I'm trying to switch between colors, but if you're trying to paint a large space, it is really nice that it holds so much moisture. So for me, it is kind of a time and a place brush. It's not one I use all the time, but a lot of people swear by these and they really love them. So it is a preference thing. And they do have these in smaller sizes, but because I didn't love this one as much as I thought I would, I didn't choose to buy those ones. But if you like the style, then that might be something you're interested in. I started with as much moisture as I could on this synthetic brush and dragged that along the paper. As you can see, it started to dry out pretty quickly. Then in comparison, I got as much moisture as I could on the synthetic squirrel tail brush and did the same thing. And you could see that the brush held a lot more moisture. Next, I tried showing you the range of the brush, going from the smallest to widest stroke on both brushes. One thing I don't like about the synthetic squirrel tail brush is that it can hold its shape and bend sideways, whereas the standard synthetic brushes will bounce back to their original shape. I don't know. I bought these and I was expecting to be amazed and love them, but I just don't. So again, that's why it's nice to start simple, and then you can invest little by little and see how you feel. I don't know. That's my opinion. Now let's talk about paper. If you're finding your own brand of watercolor paper, that's great. I have a couple things to watch out for. I would avoid anything that's for multimedia use. Usually that kind of paper is just no good, and just stick to watercolor paper. Another thing to look at is how thick the paper is. The texture of the watercolor paper that you want should be like cardstock. They measure that by grams per square inch. So anything under 200 grams is a little too thin. You want to be sure to buy 200 grams and above. Be sure to buy a pad that's at least 11 by 15 or so. Anything smaller than that is just a little too small, and it doesn't give you the space to fill in the detail later on. It's good practice to paint a little bit bigger as well. When it comes to watercolor paper, you have 2 basic choices. You can do smooth texture or having a rough textured finish. The basic kinds of watercolor paper are hot press, cold press, and rough. Hot press tends to be the most smooth because they use heat and actually iron out the paper. Cold press and rough will have the most texture. Personally, I choose rough paper because I like the texture, but it's a preference thing. But if you're going for a more realistic look, or you are using markers or pens to outline what you painted, you might want a smoother paper. It's mostly just preference. For the minimalist, I would recommend a watercolor pad. The brand is called Canson's. It's really heavy duty watercolor paper. It comes in a block. You actually peel each sheet off. So you can't like flip through it, if that makes sense. So it's nice. So you basically don't have to tape down your paper. So that's really handy. When it comes to the comprehensive list, I recommend ordering watercolor paper by the sheet. In any art store, you'd be able to find watercolor paper in these sizes. The pros are that you can try a couple brands and see what you like the best. You can also buy like the wholesale pack as well. In my channel, I always paint 16 by 20 size. So I can fit 2 of those paintings on one sheet with a little bit of scratch paper as well. So if you have a big sheet like this, it just gives you a lot of versatility. You can cut it down to whatever size you want. And it actually works out to be pretty affordable, all said and done. Now that we've covered the 3 main supplies, now we'll walk through some of the smaller accessories that you'll need. You don't need to buy a paint palette. You can use a plate or something like that. Something flat that gives you space to mix some paint the liquid won't run off of. I use plates a lot, actually, for some reason. So watercolor is an interesting paint because even though it dries, you can reactivate the pigment. So what that means is you can put your paint on your plate or your paint palette, and if you don't use it all, you can save it and use it again by just adding water. You can reactivate it. I have this. It's actually a plate too, but it has a couple of dividers. I personally prefer having something like this to work with because I can clean it off every time and have a fresh start. On the other hand, if you're traveling, having a travel paint palette really handy. You can store all of your paint colors in your paint palette and then take it with you when you travel. You can add enough paint here that you don't need to bring your paint tubes. So I only use this when I'm traveling because I find it gets really messy, and I'll show you. So it's nice because it has all of these little sections where you can store your paint colors, and then you have a side that you can mix your paints. And actually this tray here is removable, so you can even use this too if you want, but I think they're maybe intending just to mix it on here so you can wash this off. I find that it's really hard to keep this clean and keep the colors really pure, but it's super handy when you're traveling. You can see this is super dirty because I haven't used it in a long time. So just really nice, very minimal. I found a similar palette on Amazon for about $9 that I'll link below. So the next thing is you'll always need water. You'll need water to clean off your brushes. You'll need water to mix your paint. So having some kind of water is super important. You'll always need a pencil. You'll need a way of getting your paper wet. I work with a spray bottle, but you can use a sponge instead. Use what you have around the house if you are on the beginner side. I use a combination of this brush and a spray bottle to get the whole paper wet quickly. You'll need paper towels or something to dry your brush. I would say a hair dryer, but if you don't have that, it's not essential to have. You can let it air dry. It will just take a little bit more time. You'll need some painter's tape. So if you have the watercolor pad, it's less essential, so you can get away with not having it. But if you're working with watercolor sheets, you will definitely need painter's tape every time because you'll need to have something to secure your paper down. I also recommend having a painting board and a block. I use this painting board to tape the paper down onto, slightly larger than my paper, and I use a block to prop up the board to have a gentle incline. It is nice to have a little bit of an incline to prevent your paint from puddling. Another thing I would say is having a value scale. You can print one out, or you can also paint your own. I have a video explaining how to do that. This is an essential tool to getting a realistic and balanced painting. Our brains tend to see colors and extremes, and having the tonal value of your painting be accurate is what makes a really realistic painting in the end. So I use a value scale every time. You can paint one or print it out. Another thing I would recommend for the comprehensive list is having a brush cleaner. It's not as important to clean your brushes as with other mediums because your brushes won't be damaged from leaving watercolor pigment on there, but it's a good practice to wash it out, and you can also use this to condition your brush and to shape it in keeping that sharp point. So that's really nice. You'll also need a reference photo. So I work from my own photos that I take on our travels. It just gives me a fun reason to take photos when we're traveling. Another perk of working from your own photos is that you don't have to worry about copying someone else's painting or photography too closely. I find that gets into the gray area of copying someone else's work. And even if it's a photographer and you're painting their work, I would say if you're working from someone else's photos, just ask or make sure you're changing enough elements of it that it's not obviously recognizably their photo. If I do work from someone else's photos, I'll try to just use an element and work from a couple different pieces. Yeah, I'll like the figure and like the way that they're standing in a picture, and so I'll use that, but I'll put it in a different scene. Having a reference photo is super important. A little hack is to print out your pictures into the same ratio as your paper. This is really helpful for sketching out your drawing. I also recommend actually printing out your reference photos. It can be really nice to not be staring at a screen the entire time. I really like that about painting, is getting to disconnect and be working with my hands, with physical materials, and just having a break from screens. But obviously working from a screen is really convenient because you don't have to print anything out. This is totally an extra, but the last item I would add on the comprehensive list is a frame and matting the size of the painting you usually paint. I order my frames off of Frame USA. I found this company. I really liked that you can custom design your own frame. It's really easy. You just input the size of your painting, and then they guide you through making sure you choose the right matting size, and you can choose whatever frame color and style you like, etc. I find it's motivating to paint more often when you can take your finished painting and put it straight in a frame. And it's just really fun to get to display your new paintings. So now the question is where to source your art supplies. I would suggest shopping at your local art supply store for a lot of reasons, but it's just so nice to talk to people who know a lot about art supplies and what different terminology means, and they can just answer so many questions. An added bonus is if you go to a Blick store, they will price match any deal you find online. With any competitor, not just like within their website. They guarantee having the best deal. On Amazon, you can also find most art supplies. I find that their pricing can be really random. Sometimes you get really good deals. Sometimes for a simple product, it will be really expensive. So just hit or miss. It's worth shopping around, especially if you're trying to do the price match option first. But yeah, that's what I would say about where to source your supplies. Thanks again for watching this video. I hope that it was helpful to you. I'm so excited to support other artists on their creative journey. So please let me know what you would like to hear more of. Let me know what your favorite supplies are and I'll give them a try. So please like, comment, and subscribe. And let's get to painting.